Let's discuss the nervous system, the tissues of the nervous system. Let's start with a bird's eye view here, starting with the terms. The nervous system, of course, this is the system that conducts electricity throughout our body. We talked about muscle contraction and how muscles can't just contract. They need to be told to contract. They need a signal. Well, those signals come from the nervous system. Well, the nervous system the cells of the nervous system, just like there are muscle cells, there are nervous cells. The nerve cell is called a neuron. The neuron has a cell body. That's this area here. Strange looking cell. But within the cell body, it has dendrites and axons. These funny looking finger-like processes here are called dendrites. And what they do is they take signals inward and they send messages into the neuron. This other area down here is called an axon. It takes information outward, out of the cell. The peripheral nervous system is all of your the nerves outside of your brain and spinal cord. All the neurons, say in your arms and legs, for example. The central nervous system is the nerves and neurons within the CNS, or the PNS, the neurons within your brain and spinal cord. Neuroglia are the support cells of the nervous system. Astrocytes, oligodendrocytes, and microglia. Another term we'll learn is the nodes of Ranvier, or Ranvier, I don't know how you say it in French actually. Obviously a guy named Ranvier was the first guy to find that node. And we'll talk about what covers the axons, myelin and Schwann cells. Let's dig in a little deeper. As I've said, the nervous system consists of cells as well. Just like there are muscle cells and epithelial cells and connective tissue cells, there are also nerve cells called neurons. And this is a neuron. These projections, as I said, are called dendrites. And they take the electrical signals, say from other neurons, and they conduct them toward the cell body. And notice how this is a cell like any other. It's got a nucleus. The neuron is a cell like any other. It's got a nucleolus. We know all that happens inside the nucleolus, the genetic information and the duplication of our DNA and chromatin, if you recall. So, and the cytoplasm is this area outside the nucleus. And the second important part, other than dendrites, the dendrites here that carry the electrical signals inward, is the axon. The axon is this long, skinny part of the cell. It's still part of the cell that carries the electrical signal outward to where it needs to go. Let's say to your toe. Let's say to your fingers. Taking a closer look at the neuron. Neurons, as we said, have an axon, this long, thin portion. That's the axon. And axons can run from, let's say, your spinal cord all the way out to the tips of your fingers. And the cell body will be in here with the dendrites, and the axon will run all that way. They can be very, very long. Notice the covering around the axon. This is your axon right in here. But surrounding the axon is what is called a myelin sheath. A myelin sheath. Here, down at the bottom. This myelin sheath helps speed up the electrical impulse of the nerve, of the neuron. It helps transmit the signal, say from here, the spinal cord, to the fingers, and speeds it up. Boom, lightning fast. Or the other way, for that matter. Let's say you touch a hot stove. Right here, boom, you need the signal to go really fast. Well, the myelin sheath that covers the axon helps to speed that up. Now you'll notice another layer covering the myelin sheath. And there's actually a cell. It's called a Schwann cell. Here's the nucleus of the cell right here. Schwann cells. Like so. And it covers, and what it does is it creates the myelin. It offers protection, of course, but it is what is making, this cell is manufacturing the myelin that's inside. And in between, and here's another Schwann cell on the outside here, with, of course, what in the middle? Myelin, a myelin sheath. And in between, so here's a Schwann cell creating that myelin sheath in there, and here's another Schwann cell, and it'll have a nucleus in here too, helping to propagate the axon, the electrical impulse in the axon, whichever direction the impulse might be going. In between each axon, we have the node of Ranvier. It's this spot right here. These are nodes of Ranvier. You can see they're up and down the length of the axon of the neuron, right? And to review, of course, each one of these nodes, in between each of the nodes is what? A myelin sheath surrounded by a Schwann cell. Neurons, the electrical impulse from a neuron travels in two directions. It can be a motor neuron that travels from the brain or from the spinal cord down and outward. That's called a motor neuron right here. Or it can be an impulse that travels inward from, let's say, the hand up to the brain to send a signal up to the brain. That's called a sensory neuron right here. A sensory neuron. What's an example? Let's use the reflex arc for an example. Let's say you touch a hot stove. There's flame down here. Flame. Which kind of neuron is going to send a signal into the brain? A sensory or motor? Sensory is correct. The signal goes from your finger up to your brain and says, ouch, right? Now, a signal comes back down. That was a sensory neuron, through a sensory neuron. The brain sends a signal back down now through a what? a motor neuron. And it tells your muscle to do what? Contract and pull your finger off the fire. Let's look a little closer at a motor and a sensory neuron. Let's start with sensory first. At the tips of your fingers, you have receptors. That's how you are able to feel things in your skin. There's special parts of the nervous system called receptors in your skin. Once they feel that heat from the fire, ouch. They start to propagate a signal going upward through the axon, sped up by the myelin sheath surrounded by Schwann cells, up, 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 to the brain and spinal cord. Say this is your brain, here. Now, the signal traveled up this axon and into the brain. Now the brain says, ouch, and then we move over to a different kind of neuron. Of course, I'm using the wrong colors here. This should have been in green, that's fine. From a sensory, up, 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 up to the brain. The brain says, ouch. Then, through a different neuron, an entirely different neuron called a motor neuron, it sends a signal back down, 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 lightning fast, through the axon, right? Here's the axon right here. Down, signal through the axon, covered by myelin, Schwann cells. Signal goes down to where? To the muscle, to the skeletal muscle. Right? What's the muscle going to do? It's going to contract and pull your arm away from the fire. Pull your hand away from the fire. And that's a motor neuron. So there are two different neurons. The motor neuron, which acts on the muscles. The sensory neuron, which obviously is the sensation. It tells you something's hot. And the motor neuron is the signal to pull off. So two different neurons act in two different directions. There are other cells in the nervous system as well. They're the support cells we talked about. They're called neuroglia. The Schwann cell is actually a type of neuroglia. It is a support cell, right? It's providing support for the myelin. It's creating this myelin sheath around the axon. So that is actually, the Schwann cell is actually a type of neuroglia. It's a support cell. But that's a support cell of the peripheral nervous system, the nervous system that's outside of the brain, this area of the nervous system. But what about inside the brain, in the central nervous system? Inside the brain. These axons and dendrites and the sensory and motor neurons are in the peripheral nervous system. They're on the outside of the brain and spinal cord. They're in your arms and legs, etc. But inside the brain, there are also neurons. And these neurons also have a nucleus, also have dendrites and axons, albeit smaller axons, right? They also have a myelin sheath. Yes. The difference is they don't have Schwann cells. What creates the myelin sheath is this little cell here called an oligodendrocyte. It's like a Schwann cell. It's an oligodendrocyte, kind of like a Schwann cell, but inside the brain. It is what is creating the myelin for the neurons that are inside the central nervous system. So oligodendrocytes and Schwann cells are kind of the same thing except in different parts of the nervous system. They serve the same function. Now, microglia, right here, let's use a different color. Microglia are like the scavenger cells that clean up. Jay, where's a microglia? These cells right here. And they're also in the nervous system, in the brain, cleaning up all the junk and all the trash and all the leftovers. This concludes our discussion of the nervous tissues. I'm Dr. Stephen Harkins.